A $600 gravel bike. Worth it? Today I'm going to take a look at the Aventon Kijote, a budget gravel bike. Is it a fool's errand or is it worth a serious look? Find out what I like and dislike about it in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you love bikes and bike culture but aren't into the whole racing thing, basically the supple life, then you have found your people. Hit that subscribe button. So I totally admit a lot of the bikes that I review on the channel tend to be a little bit on the pricier side. So when Aventon reached out and asked if I would review their $600 gravel bike, I said yes. I personally don't think a bike has to be super expensive to ride well, and that in general it's important that we get quality bikes at all different price levels. All that said, does this bike fit the bill of being a good budget gravel bike? Well, let's see. Aventon is a relatively new brand to me. It seems like they do primarily fixed gear and single speed bikes, and this is kind of their first foray into the adventure bike market. The Kijote is a all steel bike, steel fork, steel frame, and it ships with a 700 by 35 Kenda small block 8 tire, which actually on our calipers measures out a little bit closer to 31, 32 millimeters. For 600 bucks, you get disc brakes. They are Tektro Mira, and the group set is Shimano Claris 2x8. So I was actually pleasantly surprised by the Claris brifters themselves. For this price point, I was expecting brifters where the cables would be popping out of the hoods, but with these Claris ones, they're actually routed beneath the bar tape, so it actually looks and feels pretty nice. The saddle is an Aventon branded saddle, which I actually thought was pretty comfortable. The crankset is a 50-34 and a 11-32 in the back. So again, your typical standard compact road double, which, as you guys know, in my opinion, is geared a little too high for a gravel bike, a bike packing bike, and I would even suggest even kind of a entry-level bike. I feel like a lot of people that would be interested in this bike, this might be their first road style bike. And that gearing, in my opinion, a little high. When I assembled the bike, it came together pretty easily. I know Dustin Klein reviewed this bike and he had issues with the stem. I didn't have any such issues, so your mileage may vary. The frame itself is pretty functional. It's got mounts for 2 bottle cages on the inside of the triangle, and it's got a mid-fork eyelet so you could run a front rack or even put on a mini rando rack. And on the rear, it's got braze-ons to put fenders and a rear rack. So in terms of functionality, pretty functional at this price point. The total weight of the bike, completely naked, no pedals, no cages or anything, comes in at about 26.5 pounds. So once you build that out with actual pedals and a water bottle, you're looking at closer to 28 pounds. So definitely not a lightweight bike, but something you would expect at this price point. So how does this bike ride? Is this the $600 gravel bike of your dreams? Well, it was kind of a mixed bag for me. Talking about the rear first, I actually thought the rear end geometry was kind of fun and playful. It's definitely on the shorter side of chainstay length, so it did kind of have the potential of accelerating quickly and having a nice kind of sporty rear end, but it was really bogged down by just the general weight of the bike, but also the wheels. The wheels I will get to more in a little bit. The front end of the bike handled okay. I actually thought the steering felt a little strange to me. It would take a lot to kind of initiate the initial turn, and then all of a sudden it would turn really quickly. But I would say overall, I mean, looking at the geometry, it's actually kind of an interesting bike. It's nice that it's not long and slow like I would expect for a bike at this price point, but they actually made an effort to make it kind of interesting. So definitely appreciate that. So with my time on the bike, I took it on my typical testing route, which includes paved roads, a paved climb, a rocky ascent, and a rocky descent. On the paved stuff, it handled it actually pretty well. I think this would make a great super entry-level road bike or a commuter bike or a beater bike if you wanted to ride to downtown and didn't want to leave your really nice bike outside. Definitely a bike to consider. It has those uses. Off-road, however, I had conflicted feelings. I feel like in its stock build with these tires and with these wheels, it was a little bit jarring, it was a little bit stiff. Kenda tires did pretty good on the hard pack, but I don't know if it's because I've just been riding tires in the 47 millimeter range the last couple years, but they felt not very supple. And the wheels themselves, that's where I had kind of the biggest issue. When I took it on any kind of rough terrain, the spokes were just pinging left and right, and I thought they were gonna break. So if you get this bike, it's definitely worth truing up the wheels, having them tensioned, or bringing it to a bike shop and having them kind of fine tune just just the wheels. And speaking of wheels, although it ships with the 700C wheel set, they do advertise it as being 650B compatible. So I borrowed a set of wheels from our friends at Irwin Cycling, a really nice set of wheels. These are their new carbon gravel wheels. So probably not indicative of what you would actually do realistically on this bike, but I thought it would be awesome to just try this in 650B mode and really pimp it out. So with the Irwin Cycling 650B wheels, this bike was completely transformed. Let's just put it that way. Not only did it have the plush suppleness from the 650B by 47mm tires, but it actually had more get up and go. It just felt like a completely different bike with that wheel set. But let's say you don't even go full on carbon 650B. I think this bike would definitely benefit from 650B tires. It would just kind of soften up that ride, give you more suspension, and make it a more fun and comfortable bike to ride when you're doing gravel rides, mixed terrain, single track, whatever. Stock wheel set, not a fan. Another thing I wasn't too fond of were the Tektro mirror brakes. It took a while to bed in, and you know, when I finally did get them to kind of bed in, they were still fairly slow to stop. On like super steep terrain with the weight of the bike, if you're going at speed, you definitely have to account for a longer stopping distance. So not my favorite, but could probably be improved with a different set of pads. So probably my biggest issue with the bike was actually the dropouts in the fork and in the rear of the triangle. Like I mentioned, I did a wheel swap, and it was pretty clear that the dropouts were not straight. The front wheel came out okay, but I actually wrestled with the rear wheel for about like 30 to 40 minutes trying to get it out to swap in the 650B wheel set. If you never swap the wheel sets, then you might not ever encounter this problem. But if you have to, you know, God forbid, take the rear wheel out to change the flat, then it's going to be a pain to get in and out of the frame. I literally had to stretch the frame open and knee the entire bike to pop the wheels out. And visibly looking at the back, you could see where they weren't quite straight. So all that said, I do think there are some positives with this bike. I think one, it looks really nice. It's almost got a Canyon-esque logo here in the down tube. And for me, this is probably one of the nicest looking bikes I've seen in this price point. It's not like Photoshop vomit all over the place. It looks classy. I also like that the geometry is a little bit more on the interesting and lively side rather than just going, you know, long and low and having a boring ride. It does have promise, but there are things that definitely take away from its full potential. That being mostly the stiff and heavy wheels, and also the issues I had with the dropouts. Ultimately, I think if they just offer this in a pure 650B version, it would actually ride a lot better right off the bat. You wouldn't get all that harshness from the frame and this wheel set. So, is this a bike for you? Well, it kind of depends. If the $600 mark is your absolute breaking point and you can't spend any more than that, then it would be a bike to consider. But for me, I think to make it truly a gravel bike that I would want to ride, it would require a fair amount of upgrades. Everything from the brake pads to lower gearing to a different wheel set. Or at the very least, I would swap out these Kenda tires for some Compass tires or even the Soma Supple Vitesse tires. Anything just to kind of soften up the general ride feel of the bike. But once you spend those upgrades, you're looking at, you know, $800, almost $1,000. So probably not a realistic bike for that kind of, for those kinds of upgrades. So while you could use it stock as is for a gravel ride, probably not the most supple bike. I think it actually makes a better just urban bike. Or if you've never ridden a drop bar bike before and want to kind of dip your toes into it, this might make sense. And only if like $600 is your absolute breaking point in terms of budget. Because for a little bit more, you could get into a bike like the Salsa Journeyman or some offerings from Fuji. So overall, I really applaud Aventon for putting out a gravel bike that looks this good, that has potential at this price point. Is it the best gravel bike for $600? Well, I don't know. This is actually the first bike I've started to review within this price range. I might do more next year if there's interest, because I do believe in my heart of hearts that you don't need an expensive bike to have a fun bike. Whether this bike is it, I'm not so sure, but it's starting an interesting conversation. So that's it for my review of the Aventon Kijote. If you guys have any other questions, leave those in the comments below. And if you like content like this, consider supporting the channel via the PayPal links or by buying a Supple t-shirt. And as always, keep the supple side down.